Imagine living like you're always one mistake away from being exposed. Not as a criminal, but as someone who doesn't belong. You walk into a room and your shoulders drop without permission. You avoid eye contact like it's dangerous. You rehearse a sentence in your head, then swallow it the moment someone turns toward you. And the worst part is, nobody has to say anything out loud. You can feel it anyway. The invisible ranking system. The way confident people take up space without apologizing. The way they speak, like their voice deserves to exist. There was a young man who lived inside that feeling every single day. He wasn't weak because he was lazy. He wasn't shy in some cute, harmless way. He was exhausted from constantly measuring himself. At work, he had ideas, but he waited too long to share them. Someone louder jumped in, and he told himself, of course they did. In groups, he laughed when others laughed. Even when he didn't get the joke, he nodded even when he disagreed. Because disagreement felt like stepping into traffic. Then he'd go home and replay every moment like a punishment. He'd stare at himself in the bathroom mirror and think, why am I like this? Why do other people sound so sure of themselves and I don't? He wanted confidence the way a drowning person wants air. Not to impress anyone. Just to stop feeling small. Just to stop living like his life belonged to everyone else. And that's exactly where his story began. One night, after another day of swallowing words and forcing smiles, he sat alone with the lights off. His phone was face down on the table. The room was quiet, but his mind wasn't. He kept replaying the same moments. The coworker who talked over him like he wasn't even there. The friend who made a joke at his expense and watched everyone laugh. The way his chest tightened every time he wanted to speak up, like his body was protecting him from something. And then a thought hit him so clearly it almost scared him. I can't live like this anymore. Not because he wanted to be admired. Not because he wanted to dominate a room. He just wanted to feel normal inside his own skin. He wanted to stop walking around like he owed the world an apology. A few days later, he overheard an older man talking quietly in a coffee shop. It sounded like a rumor, the kind of story people mention and forget. The man said there was a master living far away up in the mountains. Not a performer, not a social media guru, a real teacher who lived in silence and understood the secret of inner strength. The young man didn't even know why he believed it. But the words grabbed him because he wasn't looking for entertainment. He was looking for a way out. That night he barely slept. By morning he had packed a small bag, left a simple note, and started walking toward the one place he avoided his whole life. The unknown. The trail climbed higher. The air grew colder. His legs burned. More than once he thought about turning back. But every time he pictured going home, he saw the same life waiting for him. So he kept going. And when he finally reached the quiet place people described, he saw the master standing there like he had been expecting him all along. The young man stepped closer, and the closer he got, the smaller he felt. Not because the master looked intimidating. The master wasn't tall or loud or impressive in any obvious way. He was calm. That was the part that made it hard to breathe. Calm like nothing in the world could shake him. The young man tried to speak, but his voice came out tighter than he wanted. He told the master the truth. He said people disrespected him. They interrupted him. They joked about him. They treated him like he was optional He said he was tired of being the guy everyone stepped on. Then, like he was finally admitting the real reason he came, he added what he wanted. He wanted to be untouchable. He wanted to know what to say when someone tried to embarrass him. He wanted to shut people down. He wanted to walk into a room and feel dangerous enough that nobody would test him. In his mind, confidence meant aggression. Confidence meant being hard. Confidence meant winning. The master listened without reacting. No nodding, no sympathy, no correction. Just silence that made the young man feel exposed. When the young man finished, the master asked one question. He said, "Why do you think they can shake you so easily?" The young man opened his mouth, ready to blame people, ready to explain how rude they were, how unfair it was, how the world rewarded loudness. But the master didn't let him run away. He said, "You're asking me to teach you how to fight them. But what if the real fight is happening inside you?" The young man felt irritation flash through him. He had climbed a mountain for an answer, not a riddle. So he asked directly, "Then what is confidence?" The master looked at him for a long moment and said, "Most people think confidence is what you show. But confidence is what you stop needing." The young man didn't understand that yet, not fully. And that's why the master didn't give him a weapon. Instead, he turned toward the mountain path and said, "Come with me." Because the lesson was about to get strange. The master led him along a narrow trail that curved through pine trees and cold wind. They didn't talk much. The young man kept waiting for instructions, some clear rule to follow, something that would make this feel like real training. Instead, the master stopped at a quiet overlook where a stream cut through the rocks below. The water moved steadily, not rushing, not hesitating, not asking permission. The master pointed at it and said, "Sit." The young man sat on the cold stone, confused. Minutes passed. The master said nothing. Finally, the young man couldn't take it. He asked, "Is this the lesson?" The master didn't turn. He simply said, "Tell me what you see." The young man stared at the stream, frustrated. He said, "Water, rocks, it's flowing." The master said, "Keep looking." So the young man kept looking. And slowly the irritation burned down into something quieter. He noticed the water didn't argue with the rocks in its way. It didn't slam itself into them to prove a point. It didn't panic. It didn't perform. It adapted. It moved around obstacles without losing itself. The young man looked at the master and asked, "How is this supposed to help me when someone disrespects me?" The master finally turned his head and asked, "What happens inside you first, before you speak?" The young man wanted to say anger. That sounded strong. But the honest answer was fear. Fear of sounding stupid. Fear of being laughed at. Fear of conflict. Fear of being seen. He hesitated, and the master said, "You feel fear and then you cover it with anger." The young man's throat tightened. The words were too accurate. The master stood and said, "You came here asking to be dangerous. But confident people don't need to be dangerous. They don't need to prove anything." Then he started walking again. And in the distance, cutting through the mountain silence like an alarm, the young man heard barking. Loud, frantic barking. The master didn't speed up. He just said one word, "Watch." They came to a simple wooden fence near a clearing. Inside it, a dog was lunging at the gate, barking at everything that moved. The wind, a shadow, a bird that landed too close. It threw itself forward again and again, teeth bared, like the whole world was a threat. The young man instinctively leaned back. The dog looked fierce. But the master spoke softly, almost like he was describing something obvious. He said, "Tell me what you think that dog is feeling." The young man watched the shaking body, the frantic eyes, the restless pacing between barks. The animal didn't look powerful. It looked trapped. He said, "It's scared." The master nodded. He said, "Yes. The barking is not strength. It's a shield." The young man felt something uncomfortable stir in his chest because he recognized that feeling, not in the dog's teeth, but in its desperation, in its need to control what was coming at it. Then the master pointed past the fence. A short distance away, stretched out on a flat rock like it owned the world, was a lion. Still, heavy, calm, not hunting, not threatening, just existing with a kind of quiet certainty that made the air feel different. The dog barked even louder, as if demanding a reaction. The lion didn't move. The master asked, "Why doesn't it react?" The young man answered before he even thought about it, "Because it doesn't have to." The master said, "The dog needs the world to believe it's strong. The lion already knows." The young man stared, and it hit him like a cold wave. He wasn't watching animals. He was watching two versions of a human being, one that makes noise because it doesn't feel safe inside, and one that stays calm because it is grounded. The master let the silence sit for a moment, then said the words that changed the entire meaning of confidence. Real confidence is quiet. Not because you're weak, but because you're secure. The young man swallowed hard. Then the master added, "Confidence isn't aggression. It isn't arrogance. It isn't dominating a room. It's self-acceptance built on competence." And the young man finally understood why his old idea of confidence never worked. He had been trying to borrow confidence from other people's reactions. The master turned back toward the path and said, "Come. Now we start building the kind you don't have to borrow." And that's when the young man realized something that scared him more than confrontation ever had. If confidence is built, there are no shortcuts. The next morning, the young man woke up before the sun fully rose. The air was sharp and clean, and for a moment he felt calm. Then the old feelings tried to crawl back in. The doubt, the impatience, the need to prove he belonged here. He stepped outside and saw the master already moving slow and steady, like the day was not something to rush through. No dramatic training, no shouting, just simple work, carrying water, stacking wood, sweeping the same path that would get dusty again tomorrow. The young man waited for the real lesson. The master handed him an empty bucket and nodded toward the stream. The young man took it, then asked, "So I'm just getting water?" The master said, "You're practicing." The young man wanted to argue. He wanted to say, "This isn't what I came for." But he remembered the dog, the barking, the desperation. He swallowed his ego and walked down the trail. The water was freezing. The bucket filled fast, and when he lifted it, the weight surprised him. Halfway back up, the water sloshed and spilled over the rim. He tightened his grip and sped up, trying to fix it, and that only made more spill. When he reached the top, the master looked into the bucket and asked, "Why did you rush?" The young man said, "I didn't want to mess it up." The master nodded once and said, "That's your problem everywhere. You rush to control what people think. You rush to defend yourself. You rush to avoid discomfort. And you spill your energy trying to keep it all together." The young man felt heat rise in his face. The master didn't insult him. He didn't shame him. He just said, "Carry it again." So the young man did, and again and again. And slowly, something changed. The bucket wasn't lighter, but his body stopped fighting it. When he breathed, the water stayed steady. When he stopped rushing, he stopped spilling. The master watched and said, "Now you're starting to understand. Strength is calm under pressure." Then he led the young man to a small open space near the trees and said, "Insult me." The young man froze. "What?" the master repeated. "Insult me. Say the kind of thing that hurts you when people say it." The young man's throat tightened because the words came up instantly, like they had been living inside him for years. He forced them out. "You don't matter." The master didn't react. The young man added, voice lower, "You're not important." Still nothing. The master asked, "What did you feel when you said it?" The young man realized his hands were slightly shaking, not because the master was scary, but because the words were. He whispered, "I believed it for a second." The master nodded. He said, "That's where your real problem lives. You don't suffer because people speak. You suffer because you accept their words as truth." He stepped closer and said, "We're not training you to win arguments. We're training you to stop needing to win." The young man swallowed, feeling both exposed and relieved, because for the first time the path in front of him was clear. It wouldn't be loud, it would be built. And now, he was finally ready to build it. If you enjoyed this story, share it with a friend who needs to hear it too. Subscribe to the channel. I'll be sharing new stories and practical lessons in wisdom.